Thank you. Dzień dobry, good morning. It's good to be back here in Krakow. This is my fourth time coming here to Krakow. I really like this area in the city. And fortunately, the weather is great. So this talk is QA to AQ. I'm going to talk about when you're really, one of the things you're going to see is when teams become more agile, whatever that means, right? Because it seems to mean different things to different people. And so when you're becoming more agile, a lot of times QA gets forgotten, or even QA has kind of a different perspective, and how do we fit that in? And there's some different techniques we can do to make it work well with the team. I don't mind being interrupted, so if you do have a question, though it's kind of hard to see because they turned down the lights, and I got these other lights shining in my eyes, but just yell at me or something, and we'll make sure to get you a mic for whatever. So, when I think one of the misconceptions with Agile you quite often see, I go to a lot of the different Agile conferences, the big Agile conferences or smaller ones around the world in different places. And a lot of times people think Agile is this process. But when you really look at when the Agile Manifesto was done a long time ago and what people were really thinking about, what is Agile, it was really not much about process at all. In fact, one of my complaints is when I go to a lot of these conferences, people are selling you process. Oh, if you do Scrum like this, you're Agile. Or if you buy our tool and go through this process exactly like this and put things on your backlog like this, you become Agile. But when you look at the Agile Manifesto, it really focused more on how can we build more quality software. In the late 90s, that was quite a problem with some of the things that we were doing at the time. So people got together and let's shift a mindset. Let's really dedicate, and even though we're not against process and tools, those are valuable things, and documentation and following a plan is okay, but let's face the realities that the most important thing is to support the people that are doing it to build working software. Let that be our measure of success. And let's face the realities. Change happens. So let's not run from it. Let's accept the reality and build that into, we can respond to change. Rather than, okay, we had this plan, that's okay, we had a plan. I had a plan when I came here, but then I may have to adapt. Maybe the plane got delayed in Berlin on my way here. I had to adapt. I had to change my plan a little bit when I was flying in. And that's the same thing with software. We could be going along and getting these different information. And but one thing that with Agile, one thing that you'll see is that it's really dedicated. When people are trying to be Agile or practice whatever they think is Agile, you're constantly focused on trying to work with whole teams. If you're, in my opinion, if you're really doing well with Agile, you're constantly learning. We're trying to be more lean. We're getting rid of waste, and we're trying to evolve. There's lots of testing and validation. There's a lot of frameworks that can help us to keep things clean, make it better. You can do some refactoring tools. I come from the refactory. We did some of the first commercial refactory browsers, and we were really committed to make clean software and evolve it and let the architecture evolve. However, something that gets a lot of Agile teams is sometimes when an organization, especially large organizations, are going to transition to the way they were doing things before, and now Agile's become popular, at least in the US, lots of parts of Europe, down in Brazil, for example, it's become very popular. So now organizations say, I want to be Agile. And so then they buy get some training, get some process. And a lot of the focus is only on functional testing, which is good because they have these product owners and they're really looking at these user stories, and we really want to validate what we're building is right for the customer, and it's going to add value for that. A lot of times they'll see is, are we charging our invoice right, for example, or is the functionality of this thing correct? However, a lot of times what gets put off, and this is where I think a lot of times people miss kind of an important point, is what about the qualities of the system? So a lot of times qualities get left behind till way late in the game. It's like, oh, you're being agile. Don't worry about security until you're getting ready to release it. Or performance, we'll worry about that way later here. But those of us that's worked on systems a lot, we know that that can have a lot of upheaval in the system and tend to tear it apart. If there's certain architectural things that sometimes a misunderstanding of Agile says to do it at the last possible moment. And that's not really what Agile was about. It's the most responsible moment is really the better way to do this. And so by putting off thinking about, I mean, sometimes it's like with Agile, let's just commit a lobotomy and just go into these 2-week sprints, and now we're going to do Scrum, and every 2 weeks we're going to just keep magically let the architecture evolve and not really think about it and just, till the last possible moment. Well, sometimes that can really cause a lot of problems later on. At first it looks good because we're focusing on functional requirements with a product owner. Therefore, the visible things, oh, cool, I can now place orders. Now I can do this. This system will now let me do these types of things that we wanted to do. But we might be missing some very important things, and then if we wait till way late in the game, they can really tear up an architecture and give you a muddy design that can cause a lot of rewrites or possible refactoring with this. And so there's some Agile myths. I've been putting this together with a few of my friends. We got this website, agilemyths.org, that we set up, and .com as well, a couple of them. But I mean, a lot of myths is that we can easily add these qualities way late in the game, and the architecture will always just magically evolve, and we can always change the system fast. And early on, we get lulled into that deception. We become deceived by the fact that, ooh, we're able to very quickly add these functions, but later on, if we haven't really thought about this, it can really cause a lot of problems. And don't worry about all these illities, security, scalability, or usability. We'll just let that kind of magically evolve somewhere whenever it just happens to show its ugly head. And we'll be able to adapt quickly to making the system work. So this can cause quite a bit of uproar if you don't approach this. And in fact, design is always about trade-offs. That's why they hire people like us to do these systems and evolve systems, and pay us the big bucks, is because, if this was just mindless stuff that we could just do, we could just, you could just constantly create a software factory for creating this type of stuff. But there's still a lot of creative work. And in fact, a lot of the illities, when you look at quality, what kind of qualities, system qualities we need in our system, a lot of times there's trade-offs. So if I want it to be very usable, well, if I don't have to worry about security, that makes it a lot easier to be very usable. However, if I want it to be highly secure, sometimes that's constraining the user. So there's different trade-offs there. And so a lot of times it depends upon whose perspective that you're looking at, like performance versus small memory. Obviously, if we have a lot of memory, we can just cache everything into, RAM and run things very quickly, whereas if we're maybe writing an app and designing something that has very little memory, then there's a little bit of trade-off for getting the performance versus that small memory that we're working with. And there is something to be said about quality of being good enough. In fact, me and Brian Foote put in our big ball of mud paper, the most successful architecture deployed to date, that we published, is that obviously there's some kind of quality about being good enough or people wouldn't keep doing these types of things. But those of us that have to live in the systems, there is some things about making our systems more livable, our code more habitable. And so I want to talk about some things looking at that. Now, one of the things with quality that we need to consider is there's trade-offs. And a lot of times it depends on whose perspective. Now, if I'm the COO or the CFO, I look at quality as, okay, the system doesn't get my customers unhappy, and it's getting me a lot of money back. And so, okay, that's a good quality. Whereas if I'm the user experience is very nice. It's beautiful. It's nice to use. We like to use it. But if I'm a developer, I'm in there writing the Java code or whatever kind of code I'm working on, maintaining the database. It's easy to change. Nice to add new features. I'm not afraid to get in there and touch something without tearing it up. So one of the problems with qualities is a lot of times it depends upon whose perspective. You know, just like you can think of, you know, from an engineer to an artist, I mean, those are quite different perspectives on quality. Same thing when we're really looking at our systems and how we're going with these from there. Now, quality assurance teams, I think it's almost tragic in a way that in software, it's very tragic that a lot of times, many companies have missed the understanding of quality assurance. They think that the gatekeeper, quality control, at the end is quality assurance. Or they've just, you know, they had good hopes with doing QA all the way through. But if you look at manufacturing, and like Toyota with Lean and everything they did there, their whole manufacturing process is, we got quality built all the way through the process. And even the team, the people on the manufacturing floor to the, you know, the engineers, designers, all the way through, they're focused on quality. And let's just raise everybody is dedicated to quality all the way through. Let's not wait till just gatekeepers at the end. Let's all the way through look at our processes, continually improve, get rid of waste, these types of things. And it's almost tragic in Japan. Agile has been very slowly adopted from the software side, even though they're very good at doing it for the manufacturing side, even though they are starting to change a lot in Japan. So obviously, you know, QA has a lot of experience with testing, but one of the problems is a lot of times they're working independently and they're overworked sometimes, or they're also this us and them, they're the enemy, they're the problem, because they're keeping me from getting my system out. And so how can we work with this? And in fact, sometimes it might be the case that we're a small organization, we're doing a startup, and if we're doing a startup, we're not going to have a QA team. We're going to do whatever it takes to make this work. And we need to do it quick. We need to either fail quick, learn and adapt, or succeed quickly, because we can't, you know, we're not going to, the worst thing to do is to fail slowly. Take a long time to fail, and let me just put another $100,000 in. Come on, let's borrow some money, go in debt, you know, get your family upset because, you know, that you've mortgaged the house. What's better is to fail quickly and learn and adapt. So you're going to do whatever it takes so you become the quality part of that. And it's important for you to focus on that. So let's look at some ways of becoming agile at quality. I'm kind of motivating that it's important to think about these things, and if we don't, they have a tendency to tear things up. And those of us that's lived in these systems for a while has done that. And I have a good experience. I developed something for Caterpillar Inc., a very large earth-moving organization. You know, they do that, those big digging equipments and stuff like that. But I did a financial modeling system, and I was in a research environment. And I was very successful where all of a sudden, you know, some of the high-level vice presidents and managers and stuff were like, well, we want to bring this in and use. They could play what if and look at financial modelings. This is what we planned. This is what we did, and let's adapt and change. And they're like, now we want to bring it in-house. Joe, we're real happy with what you did. I was in the research environment, didn't care about security, but all of a sudden, now, you know, it's money. And the bean counters were very concerned. And then I had to refactor the system to put security in a lot later, and it had a lot of upheaval. We were able to do it, but I saw that if we had known ahead of time, if I had thought about that ahead of time, there, you know, and made it part of my plan, there's some more responsible moments I could have done that. So let's talk about how we can become more agile at quality. Now, I've been writing a whole bunch of patterns about this with some different friends and a lot of experience ports with people in industry that are doing this, and some of them I'll give you references to, some that were at this year's Agile conference in the US, the big one. But one of the main ones is we have to break the barriers. So one of the time in an organization, sometimes people are in this mindset. I'm in quality control, I'm in QA, you know, I can't, you know, communicate. Or the developer's like, ooh, you're with QA, you're the enemy, and you have all these walls. So it's important that we get over these barriers. Sometimes the barriers are physical because the QA team is in another part of the organization, split away. Sometimes it's cultural or language. The way QA people think and talk sometimes are quite different than the way that your development team or your product owners will communicate. And different types of expertise. And there's also this different mindset or this us and them type thing. We're not supposed to be affiliated with developers. We're not supposed to be affiliated with the QA group. We're supposed to just give it to them. They're supposed to let us know what's wrong. So we really have to overcome this. And how can we do this? There's some different actions that you can take to help tear down these walls. Now, one of the problems with, and what most organizations that want to become agile, the first thing they do is okay, developers, Let's teach the developers how to do maybe TDD. We're going to do a lot of unit testing. We're going to have 2-week sprints. We're going to get maybe a Scrum Master. That doesn't make you agile. You could still be very rigid with all this stuff. But that's, they're going to put this process in place. They're going to maybe do certified product owners. They're, they have all these different types of things. But they pretty much forget about, if they have a QA group, is, well, we'll just let them kind of figure out and do whatever they do. And so a lot of times organizations are finding, and especially the QA groups inside of organizations are trying to figure out how do they fit in when the organization is adapting to these more of these agile type processes, such as Scrum or TDD or these different sprints, and how do we fit into that? And how can we make better use of that? So part of it is breaking down these barriers, and we need to change the mindset. I mean, one thing that's key to Agile is everybody's part of the team. So we want to really, to start off with, you want to somehow build quality into your project rhythms all the way through the process. It's okay to think about qualities early on. We're just not going to think about them too much, and we're going to identify important ones. And if they're so important, we need to maybe schedule them on our backlog earlier rather than later. Let's figure out and make them part of our roadmap, for our planning thing, that we can do this. And so one of the things that we, for example, even with Scrum, this is a typical kind of Scrum type diagram that you have here. Normally when you have Scrum, the backlog here is just functional requirements. And it's really the product owner thinking about that. Occasionally it might sneak a couple of the items that have some kind of qualities in it, but generally they don't think about that at all. But what you can do is early on in the phase, you can make it part of your rhythm. You can identify what are the important qualities for our system. If performance or scalability is going to be key for us to release, well, we might need to think about that kind of early and plan for that, and even do some testing for that early rather than right before we release. And we can figure out, where does it fit in? Sometimes you might have to develop quite a bit of infrastructure to test certain qualities, because those qualities can go across a lot of different normal Agile user stories. And so, but we can even on our backlog, we can include some of these. And then we've even talked about, even with a normal user story, maybe you can have some fold-out qualities that are attached to it. So during this sprint, I'm working on this user story. I know that these qualities are important. And then we might even have some different quality testing as part of our normal functional testing. We can include some different things with some of these quality tasks. And in fact, sometimes what you see organizations do is they'll have sometimes a whole sprint is dedicated to certain qualities that they have to do, because now we've reached a point where we have to really test the performance and scale this thing up. It's not performing good enough, so the next sprint is focused around doing that. So you might even have a quality-focused sprint. And we wrote up a lot of these. I don't have time to go through all of these, but I just want to kind of point things out. And in fact, Scott Ambler, even with in his early book for TDD, when he was talking about test-driven development, he talked about the importance of this iteration 0. And during iteration 0, you can really think about what are the important, this conceptual modeling. Am I even building the right thing for my customer or for my business? If we're not even focused a little bit and make sure we're not wasting a lot of time, let's make sure we're building the right thing. That's iteration 0. That might even take weeks or even months, he talks about. Days, weeks, or possibly even months. If we're going to have something that's core to our, it's going to be for a multi-billion-dollar organization, and this is core to the way that we're handling our finances in the bank for many years to come, we might need to make sure that we're even building the right thing. And during that time, you can also think about what qualities are important from that. And then when you get into your sprints, your different iterations in TDD, now these are really short. These are within a couple weeks generally. I've even seen them shorter than that. But then when you're actually doing, for this iteration, you're going to be taking maybe some Agile user stories, writing your tests for it, and let that drive our design. But we can still think about, even as we're doing fast TDD and modeling in here, we can still do a little bit of modeling and brainstorming as we're going in there to make sure that we're understanding things. And if we can make our qualities visible, it can help us think during this sprint with this user story, have we got the right thing? Now, an important thing is we want to be able to keep the focus on one of the problems is a lot of times team members don't even know what are the important qualities until way late in the game. And you know, having developed a team myself and overseen a lot of different projects, most people that I've talked to, most developers, we like to know those things ahead of time. How would it, it's good to kind of understand what the real requirements are, not only the functional, but if there's going to be some additional requirements, if you tell that to developers, they'll make sure it works. And so as being part of a development team, I want to do that and get the focus on it. So something you can do is you can try to find out what these different qualities are and then include some of these different qualities as part of your different sprints. And then if there's very important key qualities, test those as soon as the most responsible moment. So as soon as we feel it's the most important time, we've got enough infrastructure and everything else, then we can go ahead and test those important qualities. We don't have to wait till we're getting ready to release to test those. And then we could even build support tools to kind of monitor those qualities as the system's going. And the whole team could be part of this. And automate where we can. Now, some qualities are hard to automate. Can anybody think of qualities that would be hard to automate? What's that? Yes, exactly. Usability. Yeah, okay. How do we measure usability? You have to actually have somebody use it and have some kind of mostly manual test. That's exactly right, usability. And so here's kind of a lightweight method that we took something and adapted something from the SEI and been working with people with. And you can create your own. I'm just kind of throwing something out there, working with different people. But you're really thinking about, for example, when a user initiates 1,000, we want to have them 1,000 order transactions per minute under normal operations. We want to make sure that when 1,000 orders are hitting our system at the same time, that for a single user, it takes less than 2 seconds before they get a response back. So that's, that might be one. Others might be, somebody tried to hack into my bank account, and I want to make sure that I did certain checks for that, or usability might be another. But you have this source of stimulus, something happens with something different artifact in response. If I had more time, I'd go into some details on this, and if we do at the end, I actually have some more detailed examples. But just to kind of give you a little bit of a feel for that is you can really think about performance, scalability, reliability. I mean, even think about maintainability. That's another hard one to measure, and a lot can be dependent upon your types of developers you have and the team that you have. But what's key here is when you're looking at this, you want to have ways of specifying and measure the qualities. Some qualities might be direct within 2 seconds, and we're able to maybe even automate that. When we make a call out to the database and it has to come back with this much load that we're simulating on the system, it has to respond within this certain amount of time. Some qualities you might have to give a scale. Okay, usability we want to say is between 1 and 5, and we have some ways of putting those numbers on there, but those sometimes are a little bit more fuzzy type numbers versus some other types of abilities. So sometimes we might have to do a ranking, other times it'll be a natural scale. What's key here is when we're going through these qualities, we want to make sure that they're visible to the team. So you might have some quality radiators. You might even be putting them up on your backlog. They might even be part of a different set of tools that you put together for some different types of ways of looking at them. And you might even want to make sure that the team sees that they might even include some quality backlog items, and you might even associate with different functional tests that during this one, while you're implementing this functional test, there are certain qualities that might be part of that, and you can include them on your roadmap as you go. And something else that can be very useful, you can even create some dashboards to be used as you're developing your system. A lot of times these dashboards that we're using internally for the development can become even operational dashboards later for the system. And it's really showing some of the important things that's going on as you're developing the system. So in order to make quality happen, first of all, we have to budget time, and we have to include it with our developing team all the way, our whole team. something that's key to Agile is a whole team type mindset. So we have to change our way of thinking on this. And so during our envision and requirements phase, we can gather, identify core qualities, write some important scenarios, and make sure that they're visible to the team as we go through. And then determine the appropriate times when the qualities might be delivered and tested. Or we can even think at the beginning of a sprint, I'm working on this part of the system. Are there any qualities that are related to that? And include that into the backlog and thinking about that. And then sometimes you can even turn these scenarios into good quality tests. And you can even maybe write up quality stories, just like Agile user stories. Or you might even attach to your normal Agile user story some certain quality types requirements and ways to measure it. Now, Agile teams in general, when people look and they really talk about Agile teams, they must be cross-functional. You know, that's key and that's important. It's also the fact that there's good communication. We're going to focus on really satisfying and building what the product owner, the stakeholder needs. And we're going to incrementally keep growing this, keep it working as we're going. And that way we get a lot of constant feedback. If we're off base, we can shift the requirements. And it's going to be very collaborative and self-organizing. And whole team is key to this. And so when you really look at an Agile quality team, what you really need to do is we're going to, possibly you can integrate QA into your team. I've been talking to a lot of organizations that got a lot of good experiences with people doing this type of thing right here, is where the QA works closely with the team, integrated during the day-to-day development. In fact, you might even embed QA full-time if you have the resources into a single team. I've known quite a few organizations to do that, and they've had great success at doing that. In fact, they've eliminated a lot of waste. They found out through some of this is sometimes there's a lot of duplication of tests, and by having that QA person, they're able to figure out what's going on, help the dev team with some of their testing, and they'll still do their own testing, but now they've reduced some of the waste that's going on. And then they can assist the team, and they're very proactive with this. And so it's more of this whole team mindset. The issue that you have to deal with, there's trade-offs. There's not a one-size-that-fits-all. There's not like a silver bullet. So if your organization is small, we may not even have a QA group. So then you have to think maybe part of the team has to manage some of that. Or you're a large organization, but your QA group, the organization doesn't have enough resources or money to hire enough people, people with QA experience to go around to the whole team. So how do you handle that? I mean, the ideal thing is to embed some of the QA people as part of the team, and they're there all along during the planning meetings, the whole phase. They can even pair up with some developers. On the other hand, if you don't have enough, some other things I've seen that's worked well is a QA person will be going from team to team and jumping around, helping those different teams. But you're not getting the full-time embedded, but at least you're getting some early on. You're getting some of that QA, and plus QA gets a better understanding before the end result of what we have to validate. They're even, they're thinking ahead of time and helping influence. So we're building the quality mindset of what's going on here. And in fact, one of our patterns that we wrote up is embedding QA within the team. And in fact, Stephanie from a company here, she wrote this paper for Agile. And if you go to agilealliance.org and scroll down a little bit to the right side, you'll find an experience report. She was in QA with this organization. They went very agile, and Stephanie wrote up a very nice report here about embedding QA in a TDD pairing and agile environment. They were doing some Java-type things, and she has a very good report kind of talking about how they reduced waste and how all of a sudden, the team spirit uplifted. And plus, even with her, they had to figure out how does QA fit in. The organization was going to adapt and change, and we're going to do TDD with some 2-week sprints and things like this. And now she can go and even sit down with developers sometime and do some trade-offs with that. And there were some big wins with that. And the team likes it. Everybody's real happy. And I think she shows in her paper, the number I think is about they had 60% overlap. She found with some of the different testing, because she would be duplicating some of the same tests. They were able to reduce some of that because now she could look at some of the tests they had, validate, and make them better. still have her own extra tests and her quality tests. And so they got a big win out of this. And the team was moving forward much quicker and adapting to changes quicker. I've talked to quite a few different people about these types of things. I won't go in detail, but if you go on Agile, the agilealliance.org, they have a lot of experience reports that you can search for. And that's where people out in industry really dealing with these issues, and then they're writing these up. And we're really encouraging these types of things at some of the Agile conferences. And I shepherded this paper, so that's why I know it. I got a lot of feedback. I was going through and helping her write it, but I kept asking a lot of questions. What did you do here? Well, how about this? You know, and how did it evolve? And there was just some big wins with that. Now, when you're testing system qualities, one of the things that's with testing, it depends on what you're testing. If you're testing usability, obviously you need to set up some kind of environment with that. You might have to clone or make some kind of test database, but sometimes for certain things you might have to have a near production environment to really test scalability or the fact that the performance is right. And then maybe security we can do more independent, but sometimes with some of these things, we may have to have these different types of environments. So depending upon the story and the different types of quality story that we're testing, we might have a lot of extensive setup. So some are easy and can be automated, and you might even include them as part of a unit test. However, some of these can be very, very complex. And there's really two types of quality tests that you generally see. One is like these simple measurements. But in the other is more these complex quality stories, like a known authorized user transfers money between accounts. The user is identified the next day by the bank, an embezzler that somehow stole my credentials, and then we want to make sure that the system has a way to restore the money back to the account. That's more of a complex thing, not just like a user initiates 1,000 order transactions. Another one might be usability. You might say, for a new user that's not familiar with the system, an average office person that's going to use this system, we want to give it to them, and without any help from me, they need to get on and figure out how to use the system within maybe a certain amount of time with just the online help. Well, that's a little bit, that's not, that's something you're going to have to really run through some different types of tests. That's more of a complex type of story rather than just a simple measurement where we can just really go down into automate it. Now, when to test is sometimes things should be early on, as I pointed out. And it might be that some of them take a lot of time. You might have to develop a lot of things there before you do it. But we really should involve everybody to deciding how and when's the most important point in time to do that. How much infrastructure do we have to have before we can test performance, for example? We may have to build up the database and build up a few other parts of the system and a certain amount of functionality, then we can do that. So the main thing here is, the main takeaway is I want to really push this most responsible moment. And in fact, some of your sprints may even just focus primarily only on qualities. And but there's a lot more to testing that your software works. Most testers are really just focused on this, the functional tests, but there's a lot more, and so we want to look at some of these system quality tests. So, for example, we need to look at, like the system load, what's the usability, and we want to emphasize some of these different types of usability. So when we're testing system qualities, we're really focusing on a lot of these different things. And so how do we build up tests for this? Something that's key that can help with this, and here's some options you can think about. So say we're trying to test usability of the system, and we're trying to figure out a way to measure this. Sometimes it's very clear because in the service level agreement says this has to perform within this amount of time. Though a lot of times what we're going to do is we're going to have some different targets. We might have an existing system that can help us, and we're replacing an existing system as a baseline, but we could be that we're trying to get out there and find some reasonable numbers. And a lot of times, one of the problems with qualities, it's more than just pass-fail. A lot of times you might think of the fact that, well, it would be really acceptable. The target is we would like to be able to handle a 2-second latency. We could live with a 3-second latency when we do that order. So that's like the worst case. But what would be outstanding if it would be in less than half a second? and so that if everything goes well. So it might be that you have these different types of landing zones that you can look at, and you can have this target that you're shooting at. So it's not just a simple pass-fail, it might be a range of values, and depending upon how well the quality performs, you might get kind of a different range. It's still within acceptable limits, but it's kind of reaching the high end of this, so we might need to watch this, and maybe next time when we do add a new piece of functionality, now that goes out of bounds. So we might need to deal with that. So one thing when we're dealing with Agile quality development, I don't have time to go into a lot of these details because since we only do like 45 minutes here, but I really want to just kind of give you a feel of this. I've written a lot of this up, and in fact, I'll be writing some blogs about it, and I have quite a few of these different patterns and best practices and some experiences. And of course, if anybody's interested, please email me on that or send me a message and I'll get it to you. But one thing when you're doing Agile quality development, we really want to focus on what's the most practical thing, more of a pragmatic approach. So from Agile quality development, we wanted, what are the important things? What's the most important qualities to our system? What's adding the most value? In fact, I would claim that this is true for any type of development, even looking at the functional part of the system. And when we're trying to test that and handle different exceptions, we need to focus on what's the most practical, gives us the most value when we're doing this. We only have a certain amount of time, and so we want to make sure that we focus on the most important qualities in our system. Obviously, we'd like it to be beautiful, perfect, the best system in the world. But perfection is the enemy of good enough. We have to be good enough to be able to go out there and, we only have a limited amount of time and resources, so we have to take advantage of that as we go. So, something I like to focus on with Agile, because a lot of times I think people miss this point, and this is related to Agile, is the misunderstanding of Agile is if we do Scrum exactly like this, then we're being Agile. If we do this kind of pairing and TDD exactly this way, and in fact I claim that if you're doing Scrum, anybody in here doing Scrum? Anybody? Quite a few people doing Scrum. That's one of the popular methods nowadays, right? If you're doing Scrum the same today, a year from now, the same way you are doing it today, I claim you're doing it wrong. Because what's key to Agile? A key important principle. Yes, exactly. Understand, retrospect, learn, adapt. Just like if we're lean, we want to learn very quickly and get rid of waste. So even with Scrum, we need to do that. So when you have the Agile mindset, one of the most, I actually was fortunate enough to actually, for the Agile conference, shepherd another paper. I'm going to go meet the guy in a few days. He's going to be in Sweden, but he talks about mob programming, and it's like XP scaled up to the team, and how they got an order of magnitude performance thing with doing that. And if you Google mob programming, you'll find some interesting things. This isn't about mob thing, but one of his key takeaways, which is one of my key takeaways, is why I mentioned it, is retrospectives. I mean, the team is constantly doing retrospectives every day because everybody's working together in the same space. They don't even have to do stand-ups because they're all there together, the whole team. The product owner comes in, they're part of that all the time. And they really kind of eliminate some of that low communication things such as emails. Even phone calls are a little bit slow. It's like face-to-face and constantly be focused on what we're doing. So when I think of being Agile, be Agile, don't do Agile. I mean, doing Agile is just kind of doing some of these practices. But you really want to think more about being Agile. And something you can kind of relate to this is like thinking fast versus thinking slow. And this is a great book, by the way. Daniel Kahneman talks about this. And there's value in both. Sometimes with Agile and TDD and some of the other things, we get caught up with this fast thinking. Red, green, red, green. The test is red, let's make it green. And just, we might be micro-optimizing. But sometimes we might have to stop and think about the bigger pictures. What qualities are important? There is value for both, but think about it, but just don't do too much of the slow thinking. Sometimes I need to stop and contemplate, whereas the fast thinking might save my life. A car's coming at me and I jump out of the way. So they're both very valuable in the same way with our development. And so there are some things we can do to sustain the architecture and for the long term and making things more quality. Mostly we're trying to make this system more livable. And there are some Agile practices that can help us deal with this and deal with making sure we have some value. Do something, prove and refine it. Learn from it. pay attention to what's going on. And in fact, we have some indicators. If our system is easier to change and we can add new functionality and we're not breaking the system and certain qualities, as we're evolving it, the system maintains those qualities, then that's good. There are some different types of things I've been working on for this, but here's something that's very interesting. Steve McConnell points out that there's no one single techniques that give you quality, like even for quality code, for improving code quality. In fact, if you look at, you can't read this very well, but regression tests or informal code reviews or unit tests, I mean, the average is 40% for any one technique. The highest is high volume beta test, over 1,000 users. That might get you up to 70-some%. But what's interesting is, and Steve McConnell goes to show this, if you combine 3 or 4 of these techniques, you can get 90%. So there's no one single technique. So really being the agile mindset and being agile, we're going to do whatever gives us the most value. So for summary, quality doesn't just happen. We really need to think about it, and that's really what I hope to leave you with, is learn, adapt, and change. Let's build quality in from the get-go. Let's uplift everybody. Make it part of the whole team. We're all responsible for quality. That's what Agile was supposed to be doing. Even as a developer, I have a responsibility from that. And it can require some specialization, and that's okay. And there's different lightweight methodologies you can do to become more agile at quality. And so we can kind of get back and we can be more pragmatic, do more realistic type things rather than being rigid. Sometimes some of the agile people get so rigid, that they're being more dogmatic, bullheaded, my way or the highway, and that's no longer agile. Agile is really what's doing that gives you the most value for what you're working on. And so it's almost tragic that from QA perspective, a lot of times a lot of organizations have digressed to QC, quality control, gatekeeper, rather than let's make quality be part of the whole thing. And we can do this, and this is really, there's some big wins in doing this. So obviously I'll be making these slides available, and there's some different references. I do have a little bit of time. So that's really what I had for that, and I have a lot of material if anybody wants to email me and they're looking for some of the write-ups of some of these experiences or some of these experience reports from other people that's been doing this in industry that have some good war stories to learn from. But we have time for a question or two if somebody wants to. Yes?
Are there any limits for cross-functionality in an agile team, or everyone can just become developer with focus on testing?
Is there any limits on what?
Cross-functionality.
Cross-functionality. Well, that's why I say sometimes agile teams say, oh, sorry, we can't have specialists. But I disagree with that. Sometimes you need to bring specialists in. And QA people are very good at understanding tests. And we should encourage that and not make them look at a less than or whatever. Sometimes I've talked to some QA, they feel, oh, wow, the developer don't think I understand anything. And then sometimes QA thinks the developer doesn't understand, and we need to get away from that mindset. We're on the same team together, and we can, possibly a QA person can, you can grow those people. So you can get some cross-functionality. You can start teaching some of your developers, but it's still okay to have some specialists too, I think. Okay?
Thank you.
Any others? You're right here.
Quick question. How to incorporate slow thinking into typical Scrum process? Because you've mentioned iteration 0, which seems to be ideal for the start, but how to make it work during the project?
Great question, by the way. And so, yeah, so iteration 0 is fine, but once the project starts, you still, so for example, here's a few ways. During the sprint planning meeting, let's go ahead and, now we realize that maybe there's a couple things we need to brainstorm, and let's do a little bit of, it's not a lot, but we can do a little bit of slow thinking. I think pairing helps with that. We're pairing up, or I'm working on a component, and you're working on a component, and I realize there's some issues, let's go out for lunch together, or let's go over to the whiteboard and go ahead and do a little bit of drawing. It's okay to take a little bit of time to do some of that slow thinking and brainstorming. Whereas sometimes people just get caught up with, oh, I can't do any of that, and then they're micro-optimizing, but since I have to integrate with you, I might be missing some important key principles. So there are still some things that you can do, and even like we may have a quality-focused sprint, but there are some ways of doing a little bit of slow thinking from doing that, even with the planning. Okay? Yeah, over here, and then one more. We're probably running out of time. So we'll make a couple more. Yeah, go ahead.
You've mentioned that you've developed this financial system for the research, and then the requirements has changed because it was put somewhere else, and you needed to add a security into it. And this was hard. This was expensive. So, but when you were doing the system, this quality, security was not even on the roadmap or planned. So
that's right.
If you would do it then, you could lose some money and maybe not get the money back, yeah? So
that's right.
How to manage this?
Yeah, and in that case, because I was in a research environment, it wasn't important, so obviously I didn't do it. But in general, for most people that are out there building financial systems, those qualities are important, and it's good to think about them ahead of time. So at that point, it's to do it. If you're in a research environment, I just got lucky in the research and made a lot of high-level people happy that were funding my research, and then they're like, let's bring it in. And I'm like, oh, but, and then, you know, all of a sudden the gatekeepers were like, well, you know, how secure is it? This is money. This is about all our corporate money and stuff like that. So then we had to adapt the system. So my main point with motivating that was how much I know that if you don't think about those, how much it can tear a system apart. It can really tear a system up a lot. But in general, yeah, if it's not important, then you don't worry about it until you need to, and then you refactor it at that point. Otherwise, you're wasting time, right? I would have wasted time.
Okay, thanks.
Did we have time for one more?
I'm afraid
Okay, we're out of time. I'll talk to people afterwards, whoever has more questions. But thank you very much. It's very good to be here in Krakow, and as I'm here for a couple of days, I'm always open for talking with more people. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the lecture.